Hamas leader says Palestinians are top priority in peace talks. Ukrainian parliament overhauls civilian drafting into armed forces. Good afternoon and Salam Malaysia Madani. You're watching World Today with me, Renee Fong. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh has denied his sons who were killed in an Israeli strike on Wednesday were fighters for the group. He also said the interests of the Palestinian people are placed ahead of everything when asked if their killing would impact talks. Speaking from Doha, Haniyeh explained that they were still seeking the ceasefire deal, but that Israel is still procrastinating and evading a response to the demands.
يعني طبعا هذه ادعاءات كاذبة وتبرر هذه المجزرة وهذه الجريمة، وتعود الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على تمرير جرائم ومجازر وحتى حرب الإبادة الجماعية بأكاذيب وبسرديات وروايات كاذبة ومفترى. كيف يمكن لشباب كما يدعي متوجهين لأن ينفذوا عملية وهم معهم أطفالهم؟ يعني هذا في قمة الاستخفاف بالعقل البشري.
Israeli forces killed 3 sons of Haniyeh this week without consulting top commanders or political leaders, an action that risks complicating efforts to free hostages still in Gaza. Quoting senior Israeli officials, it reported that Amir, Mohammad and Hazim Haniyeh had been targeted as fighters and not because they were the sons of Hamas's political leader. The Israeli military, however, did not comment on reports that 4 of Haniyeh's grandchildren had also been killed. Ukraine's parliament has passed a bill to overhaul the process of how the armed forces draft civilians into their ranks. The decision came after a general told the chamber that Russian forces outnumbered Kiev's troops up to 10 times on the battlefield in the east. 2 years into a war against Russia, a country with 3 times its population, Ukraine has been suffering setbacks on the battlefield. Tens of thousands of soldiers have been killed, many times more have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have now fought for 2 years with no respite. The new measure should increase troop numbers by requiring men to update their draft data with the authorities, boosting payments to those who volunteer and letting some convicts serve. It also adds some new punishments for draft dodging, but stops short of severe measures that had prompted public opposition. Military analysts say Ukraine's armed forces need to address acute manpower shortages as well as shortage of ammunition. Worsened by U.S. Republicans have been blocked military aid from Washington and potentially flagging support from some European allies. The bill passed with a majority of 283 votes and requires President Volodymyr Zelensky's signature to become law. In a related development, Japanese Premier Fumio Kishida warns that Ukraine could collapse under Russia's onslaught without U.S. support, potentially emboldening China and triggering a new crisis in East Asia.
The Prime Minister of Japan.
In the first speech to a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress by a Japanese leader in 9 years, Kishida urged Americans not to doubt its indispensable role in world affairs and said Tokyo was undertaking historic military upgrades to support its ally. President Joe Biden's request for $60 billion in aid for Ukraine has been stalled for weeks as Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson has refused to allow a vote on an issue that has showed division ahead of a 5th November presidential election. Kishida said the world was at a historic turning point, with freedom and democracy under threat, emerging countries holding more economic power, and climate change and rapid advances in artificial intelligence disrupting people's lives. But Kishida noted that the biggest challenge the world faces comes from China. Japan has consistently raised concerns about Chinese military activity close to its islands and neighboring Taiwan. Taiwan Taiwan, claimed by China as its own territory, has raised its alert level since Russia invaded Ukraine, wary of the possibility Beijing might make a similar move on the island, though it has reported no signs this is about to happen. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that recent airstrikes on Ukraine's energy grid, which have caused huge blackouts, are part of the Kremlin's demilitarization of its neighbor. His comments came after Moscow launched a barrage of aerial attacks yesterday, targeting energy facilities across Ukraine. Putin said the strikes were also in response to Kiev targeting Russia's energy infrastructure, including oil refineries, as the conflict drags on into its third year. He said Russia has seen recently a series of strikes on their energy sites and were obliged to respond. The leader claimed that Russia had not targeted Ukrainian electrical installations during the winter for humanitarian reasons, as they did not want to deprive electricity to social infrastructures. Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure during the winter of 2022 to 2023 left millions of people without light or heating for long periods. This last winter, Ukraine's electrical grid was hit less often until Moscow launched a new wave of attacks starting in early March. Yesterday, Russia pounded Ukraine's energy facilities with around 40 drone attacks, destroying a power station in the Kiev region. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky renewed his appeals for fresh air defense systems on a visit to Lithuania. Drone attacks on the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine are a consequential juncture in the war in Ukraine and must stop. United Nations nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi told his agency's 35-nation board of governors on Thursday he wanted to ensure these reckless attacks do not mark the beginning of a new and gravely dangerous front of the war. The UN Nuclear Watchdog's Board of Governors held an emergency meeting on Thursday at the request of both Ukraine and Russia to discuss attacks on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after the countries accused each other of drone attacks. The International Atomic Energy Agency has said drones struck the Russian-held facility in southern Ukraine on Sunday, hitting one reactor building. It has not ascribed blame, but has demanded such attacks stop. Russia said on Tuesday that Ukraine had again attacked the plant with drones for a third day. Kiev said it had nothing to do with any such attacks and any incidents were staged by Moscow. All reactors are shut down at Europe's largest nuclear power station located near the Ukraine war's front line. However, it requires constant power to cool the reactors and prevent a potentially catastrophic meltdown. And at the White House, long simmering tensions between China and its neighbors took center stage on Thursday as leaders of the United States, Japan, and the Philippines gathered at the White House to push back on Beijing's stepped-up pressure on Manila in the disputed South China Sea. U.S. President Joe Biden's administration is expected to announce new joint military efforts and infrastructure spending in the former American colony, while he hosts Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. alongside Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Washington for a first-of-its-kind trilateral summit. Topping the meeting's agenda is China's increasing pressure in the South China Sea, which has escalated despite a personal appeal by Biden to Chinese President Xi Jinping last year. The Philippines and China had several maritime run-ins last month that included the use of water cannons and heated verbal exchanges. The dispute centered on the second Thomas Shoal, home to a small number of Filipino troops stationed on a warship that Manila grounded there in 1999 to reinforce its sovereignty claims. China claims almost the entire South China Sea, including the maritime economic zones of neighboring nations. A 2016 ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration found that China's sweeping claims have no legal basis. Up next, Vietnamese tycoon sentenced to death over billion-dollar fraud case. A court in Vietnam on Thursday sentenced real estate tycoon Trong My Lan to death over her role in a financial fraud case worth 304 trillion dong, or equivalent to 12.46 billion US dollars. Lan, the chairwoman of real estate developer Van Tin Phat Holdings Group, was found guilty of embezzlement, bribery and violations of banking rules at the end of a trial in Vietnam's business hub, Ho Chi Minh City. The trial, which began on 5th March and ended earlier than planned, came as part of a campaign against graft that the leader of the ruling Communist Party, Nguyen Phu Trong, has pledged for years to stamp out. Her lawyers now have 15 days to appeal the verdict. The crackdown, dubbed Blazing Furnace, has seen hundreds of senior state officials and high-profile business executives prosecuted or forced to step down. At one point in 2022, Vietnamese stocks suffered a $40 billion wipeout following a series of big corporate arrests, rattling investor confidence at a delicate moment for the fast-growing economy. The value of her alleged asset appropriation was equivalent to about 3% of Vietnam's gross domestic product (GDP) in 2022, and prosecutors said that they seized more than 1,000 properties belonging to her. From Vietnam over to Canada and France, Prime Minister Gabriel Attal of France and Canada's Justin Trudeau defended a trade pact between Canada and the European Union, whose ratification has been hindered in France's legislature. The pair expressed confidence in the continued implementation of the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, with Attal calling it a win-win agreement, despite opposition in his own country. The visiting Attal said the figures do not lie and noted that since it came into force, trade between both countries has progressed by more than a third. Trudeau, meanwhile, said Canada would continue to demonstrate the positive impact on citizens of trade and responsible commerce between friends and allies who share the same values. Following its approval by the European Parliament in early 2017, the trade agreement has been applied provisionally since September of that year, but requires ratification in all EU member countries to take full effect. 10 European states, however, have yet to ratify the agreement that includes preferential access to Canadian minerals such as uranium or lithium, which are critical for energy transition and prized by Paris. Trade between the EU and Canada has increased since the war in Ukraine, as European countries substituted Russian imports for Canadian products. More on France. Its President Emmanuel Macron on Thursday blamed a budget deficit blowout on the wider European economic slowdown. He ruled out raising taxes to plug the hole and instead vowing to stay the course on an economic strategy he said was bearing fruit.
Nous avons eu un choc conjoncturel. C'est ça ce qui s'est passé. En fin d'année dernière, qui a été plus brutal, plus rapide qu'attendu. Largement en raison du ralentissement, de la récession allemande, du ralentissement italien et des économies européennes qui nous entourent. Ce qui fait qu'on a eu un déficit qui s'est dégradé en 2023 et une croissance embarquée en 2020, donc plus important, et une croissance en 2024 plus faible qu'attendu.
French officials said earlier this week that the Eurozone's second biggest economy will overshoot its budget deficit target for a second straight year in 2024 and plans to seek 10 billion euros in cuts to reduce the shortfall. Speaking to reporters outside an arms manufacturer's plant, he said he would not shift strategy and ruled out raising taxes, despite calls from some lawmakers to increase taxes on the rich and companies to cut out a deficit seen at 5.1% of gross domestic product GDP this year. Meanwhile, Sam Bankman-Fried, facing the prospect of spending much of his adult life behind bars, appealed his conviction and 25-year prison sentence for stealing $8 billion from customers of the now bankrupt FTX cryptocurrency exchange he founded. Defense lawyer Mark Mukasey had announced plans for the appeal to the Manhattan-based Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals during Bankman-Fried's 28th March sentencing hearing. The 32-year-old former billionaire crypto wonderkind was convicted in November on 7 counts of fraud and conspiracy in what federal prosecutors have called one of the biggest financial frauds in the U.S. history. Bankman-Fried's appeal could take years, and he faces steep odds with his lawyers needing to persuade the Second Circuit and potentially the U.S. Supreme Court that U.S. District Judge Louise Kaplan made significant errors that deprived Bankman-Fried of his legal rights and made the trial unfair. Bankman-Fried's sentencing put an exclamation point on his downfall from an entrepreneur whose meteoric rise prompted adulation, reverence and jealousy from some quarters into the biggest trophy for U.S. prosecutors in their crackdown on excesses in the cryptocurrency markets. Boeing's Latin America President Landon Loomis says that the embattled airplane manufacturer is focusing on rebuilding trust. The company's reputation had taken a dip after a series of safety incidents have shaken trust in the company and led CEO Dave Calhoun to announce he would step down by year-end.
We are in the moment of a deep, fundamental trust-building exercise that has to flow through our entire factory. Our engagements with the press, with government stakeholders, with our own employees, that's the moment we're in right now. And it's, I find us seizing this moment and approaching it with the sincerity, the transparency, and the urgency that is required. I think that's what's reflected in the transition. That's how we're handling this process of leadership transition.
The executive stated that the manufacturer's connection with LATAM Airlines is expanding, and Boeing collaborated closely with the airline and Australian government following a flight that experienced a sudden mid-air descent and caused injuries to 50 individuals, among other occurrences. In February, an expert panel found a disconnect between Boeing's management and employees on safety concerns, and some investors said a wider management shake-up is needed to address the company's safety problems. Russia test launched its Angara A5 rocket from the Vostochny Cosmodrome on Thursday for the first time after technical glitches prompted officials to abort missions at the very last minute for 2 days in a row. The launch of the Angara, a new post-Soviet launch vehicle, is intended to showcase Russia's post-Soviet space ambitions and the growing role played by Vostochny, which sits in the forests of the Amur region of Russia's Far East. Roscosmos said an Angara A5 launched with a test payload and it worked normally. The upper section separated and put the test payload into orbit. On Wednesday, the test launch of the space rocket was cancelled due to a malfunction of the engine launch control system. Russia began the Angara project a few years after the 1991 fall of the Soviet Union as a Russian-made launch vehicle that would ensure access to space, even without the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which Russia rents from Kazakhstan. First Angara A5 test flight took place in 2014 and another followed in 2020, both from Plesetsk. With this launch, flight design tests of the Amur space rocket complex with Angara heavy class launch vehicles to Vostochny began. It said that Angara A5 was much more environmentally friendly than Russia's Proton M as Russia's heavy lift rocket, which has been in operation since the mid-1960s. Cases and deaths from the dengue epidemic in Peru have more than tripled so far in 2024 compared to the same period last year. The government is stepping up efforts to contain the infections, which are more frequent in poorer areas of the country. The government of President Dina Boluarte announced this week that it had approved an emergency decree with extraordinary economic measures to strengthen the strategy against the epidemic. According to Health Ministry figures updated recently, the number of deaths from dengue fever and suspected cases under investigation rose to 117 on the 13th week of 2024, compared to 33 deaths in the same period last year. Experts said the figures in Peru are alarming because the ability of the transmitting Aedes aegypti mosquito to spread is reaching regions where dengue has not been detected before. The highest number of cases has been reported in coastal and northern regions of the country, such as Lima, La Libertad, and Piura. The emergency in Peru, where dengue has shown a high incidence of 330.27 cases per 100,000 population, adds to serious outbreaks in other South American nations, such as Brazil and Argentina. In sports, United defence crisis persists with ruling out of Rafael Varane. Liverpool slumped to a shock 3-0 home defeat by Atalanta on Thursday as Gianluca Scamacca struck twice for the Italian side in their Europa League quarter-final first leg. Atalanta took the lead at Liverpool after 38 minutes when an unmarked Scamacca latched on to David Zappacosta's cross to strike a low shot past keeper Calvin Kelleher, who should have done more to keep the effort out. After the break, Scamacca pounced on poor Liverpool defending the fire home from a fine cross by Charles Di Catalare in the 60th minute before Mario Pasalic sealed the route 7 minutes from the time with a simple finish of a rebound from Kelleher. The Europa League favourites need another stirring comeback to resurrect Jurgen Klopp's chances of signing off with a Dublin final. It was Liverpool's first loss at Anfield in 26 games this season and their joint heaviest home defeat in European competition. Manchester United central defender Rafael Varane will be out of action for several weeks due to a muscle injury. The Premier League club on Thursday confirmed the matter and said Varane was injured in United's 4-3 Premier League loss at Chelsea last week. Following this development, Varane will be joining fellow defenders Lisandro Martinez and Victor Lindelof on the sidelines. Eric Ten Hag's Team 6 in the table have been ravaged by injuries to key defenders this season. Along with Martinez and Lindelof, left-back Luke Shaw will be out of action for the next few weeks. Harry Maguire and Aaron Wan-Bissaka have missed many games, and left-back Tyrell Malacia has not featured since undergoing knee surgery last year. Johnny Evans has also been ruled out of the upcoming match against Bournemouth. United said Frenchman Varane, 30, is hoping to return before the end of the season, and Evans' injury layoff is expected to be short-term. The club have 7 games of the Premier League campaign remaining and face a battle to qualify for Europe, with the club looking set to miss out on a place in next season's Champions League. Nike unveiled Olympic kits for the teams it sponsors on Thursday, alongside athletes including Kenyan marathon star Eliud Kipchoge and British sprinter Dinah Asher-Smith, betting that top athletes can help it win more everyday consumers. After a long stretch of lackluster sales, this summer's Olympic Games in Paris offer a fresh chance for Nike to direct the world's attention to its performance products. As well as outfitting US athletes across all sports, Nike will provide kit for the athletics teams of Canada, China, Kenya, Germany and Uganda at the Olympics, basketball for China, France, Japan and Spain. Nike warned 3 weeks ago that its revenue in the first half of its 2025 financial year would shrink and said it would cut back on orders of established shoes such as the Air Force One as it tries to focus on new innovative products. While Nike, with annual revenue of $51.2 billion in the year to May 2023, is much bigger than Adidas. Analysts expect its annual sales growth to lag in 2024, 2025 and 2026. Seeing Olympians break records in Nike gear could help push more shoppers to the brand. However, it will remain to be seen whether Nike has the strong product to capitalize on the attention it will get. Fernando Alonso has signed a new multi-year deal with Aston Martin, the team confirmed in a statement on Thursday. The deal ties Alonso, 42, with Aston Martin in Formula One for at least the next 2 seasons. The decision also takes Alonso out of the equation for potential seats at Red Bull and Mercedes next season. Alonso was of interest to both teams, so choosing to stay at Aston Martin is a big vote of confidence in the team as they seek to move towards the front of the grid. The double Formula One world champion moved to Aston Martin for the 2023 season from Alpine and claimed 6 podium finishes in his first 8 races. Alonso bagged his 100th podium by finishing 3rd at the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, becoming one of just 6 drivers to achieve the feat. Alonso will be driving in F1 at least until he is 45 and possibly beyond. The Spaniard said retirement never went to his mind, adding that he felt he loves driving too much to stop at the moment. Amid relatively stable regulations and a converging field, Aston Martin have experienced a solid but unspectacular start to the 2024 season, remaining in 5th position behind Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren and Mercedes with a series of top 10 finishes. The Brazilian embassy in Rome on Wednesday displayed Ayrton Senna's McLaren car ahead of the 30th anniversary of the legendary Formula One driver's death. Senna won 15 wins out of 16 races in 1988, with the car leading him to win his first world title at Suzuka. It was part of the National Automobile Museum, or MAUTO, in Turin that features all memorabilia from the Brazilian triple world champion who died on 1st May 1994 at 34 after crashing in the San Marino Grand Prix at Italy's Imola circuit. Senna, known as much for his 3 world championship wins as his charity and charisma, will be remembered on 1st May on the Imola track, where fans will gather at the exact moment of the crash at 2:17 local time. Senna died in 1994 after his car suddenly veered off the track 5 laps into the race and hit a wall. He died at the trackside despite an attempt by doctors to revive him. The death of Senna, the last driver killed during a Formula One race, and Australian Roland Ratzenberger the day before, sent shockwaves through the motor racing world and led to sweeping changes to safety regulations. And that's all we have on World Today. And to recap on our top story, Hamas leader says Palestinians are top priority in peace talks. Till next time, I'm Renee Fong. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thanks for watching RTM, teman setia Anda. Have a pleasant afternoon.